This is what happened when a law meant to stop criminal charges against street vendors went into effect, but enforcement didn't follow. In just 10 days, NYPD officers issued at least 7 criminal summonses to street vendors in Manhattan and Brooklyn, even though a new law was supposed to eliminate those charges. And that points to something bigger than a simple mistake. It shows a disconnect between what the law says and what's actually happening on the street. So the question is pretty straightforward. If the law changed, why are vendors still being criminally charged? Let's walk through it. The law itself is clear. It was created with one purpose: to eliminate criminal summonses for street vendors. There's no gray area there. The intention was direct. Vendors shouldn't be facing criminal charges for vending-related issues under this new framework. But almost immediately after the law took effect, at least 7 criminal summonses were issued, not months later, not after some long transition period, within 10 days. And according to reports made to the Street Vendor Project, this doesn't look like a one-off situation. It suggests something more systemic. It suggests the system hasn't caught up. Because a law like this only works if the people enforcing it are actually operating under it. It needs training, it needs communication, it needs alignment across agencies, and right now, the early signs point to that not happening. The concern is that NYPD officers may not have been properly trained or updated on the new law, and if that's the case, then this isn't just about non-compliance, it's a gap between policy and practice. And you can see exactly what that looks like through one story. A 23-year-old halal food vendor named Adam was issued a criminal summons over the weekend for failing to display his vending license. Now, he has to appear in criminal court. And if he doesn't, he could face a warrant for his arrest. That's not minor, that's a full criminal process. And it happened after the law was supposed to prevent this exact situation. But this isn't new for him. In the months before the law took effect, he says he received more than a dozen criminal summonses. On top of that, he dealt with a constant stream of civil summonses from the Department of Sanitation and the Department of Health. So even before the law changed, enforcement was already intense. And after the law changed, that pressure didn't disappear. Which leads to another question. If the goal was to reduce or eliminate criminal penalties, but vendors are still experiencing them, what actually changed? From the vendor's point of view, not much. They're still being stopped, they're still being cited, and in some cases, they're still being pulled into the criminal system. And when you zoom out, there's a bigger pattern behind all of this. In 2025 alone, the NYPD issued 3,662 vending-related criminal summonses. That shows how widespread this kind of enforcement has been. But there's another layer to it. The vast majority of those summonses went to vendors of color. So this isn't just about volume, it's about who is being impacted. When a system produces that kind of outcome, and then a law is introduced to change it, the expectation is that something shifts, that enforcement eases, that the impact starts to look different. But so far, the early signs suggest that hasn't happened. What we're seeing instead is continuation, and that's why advocacy groups are stepping in. Documented advocates are now calling for a rally, pushing the NYPD to comply with the new law. This isn't about debating the law itself, it's about making sure it's actually being followed. Because at this point, that's the real issue. Not whether the law exists, but whether it's being enforced the way it was intended. And that difference matters. A law on paper doesn't change anything if enforcement stays the same. Without alignment, the system just keeps running the way it always has, even if the rules technically changed. So this isn't just a legal issue, it's an operational one. There's a gap between policy and execution, and that gap has real consequences. For vendors like Adham, it means court appearances, the risk of warrants, and ongoing pressure. For others, it means continuing to operate under the same risks they faced before the law even existed. And on a larger level, it raises a bigger question about how laws are actually implemented. Passing a law is one step. Making sure it's understood and followed, that's another. Right now, those two steps don't seem aligned. And that's why this situation matters beyond just 7 summonses. They're an early signal, a sign that something isn't working the way it was supposed to. And if that doesn't change, the gap between the law and enforcement doesn't just stay there, it gets wider. So where does that leave things? Right now, there are 2 realities happening at the same time. On one side, there's the law, a clear directive meant to eliminate criminal summonses for street vendors. On the other side, there's enforcement, officers still issuing those summonses just days after the law took effect. And in between those two realities are the vendors. They're the ones dealing with both, operating under a law that says one thing while experiencing something completely different in practice. That's the tension at the center of this, and it's still unresolved. The rally being organized by advocates is one attempt to close that gap, to push for accountability, to make sure the law actually translates into real change. Because without that, there's a real risk that nothing changes at all. So the question going forward is simple. Will enforcement catch up to the law, or will vendors keep facing the same consequences even after the rules were supposed to change? That's what this comes down to. A law was passed to eliminate criminal summonses for street vendors, but within 10 days, those summonses were still being issued, and until that gap is closed, the outcome stays the same.